Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 182. A good gebench to Yor. We're confident and sure that all our tefillas and Yom Kippur, all the prayers went straight where they need to go, and be mamshich and draw down all the brachas and hamshachas, all the transmissions to each person, the boneh Chaim, zene Rivka, all the blessings that we need physically and materially and spiritually and on all levels and dimensions. Today is the day after Yom Kippur, which has a special name, B'Shem Hashem. The name of the Baal Shem Tov is called B'Shem Hashem. We're going to discuss, open up with that, being that it's today, as we always do, the timely matters. I want to dedicate this episode to the occasion of the engagement of Avram Shtiffelman from Brazil to Chani Telsner. May it be B'Shor Tev Mitzlachas, Chassidus Binyan Adeyad, and Nachas, and only revealed Simchas. So B'Shem Hashem, what does that mean exactly? Literally, B'Shem Hashem means the name in the name of God. B'Shem Hashem. Why is it called B'Shem Hashem? So first let's start with the sources. The sources begin, the Rebbe, as you may know, composed Sefer HaMinhagim, Chabad, all the customs of Chabad. It initially did not come out in a booklet. It first came out in the Kuntresim, the Sofis, and the additions, addendums, or appendix, to the Kuntresim, to the little pamphlets the Rebbe would give out. The Rebbe was, of course, the head of Kahos, and he would publish for every week or every few weeks a kuntris that was given out that Shabbos in Shul. For example, everyone knows Basar Legani. Basar Legani Tovshin Yud was the kuntris given out for that Shabbos Yud Shvat, which would end up becoming the stalkos of the Frierdiker Rebbe that year. But the years before that, Tovshin Tes and Tovshin Ches, if you look in the volumes, later they were all put together, these kuntresim. They were put together in Sefer HaMamorim kuntresim, and also in Sefer HaMamorim Tovshin Ches and Tovshin Tes and Tovshin Yud and Tovshin Yud Aleph. These were once individual pamphlets, and the pamphlet included, in most cases, a maimer, always a maimer, some sichos of the Frierdiker Rebbe from different years, and then often customs, minhagim. Later, these customs will be joined together and become a Sefer Minhagim. So in the kuntris in Pei Hey, which is printed in Sefer HaMamorim Tovshin Yud Aleph, let me explain that as well, just for the importance of the history of it all. The Rebbe continued to give out these kuntresim even after Yud Shvat Tovshin Yud. He gave them out all the way till Tovshin Yud Beis. So the Rebbe was still giving out and publishing a kuntris from the Frierdiker Rebbe's Mamorim. As a matter of fact, Basar Legani, that was the first 5 chapters. Then there was the next Hemshech HaYesheva's Beganim, which was in the same kuntris. And then the next kuntris Purim, the Rebbe gave out the next 10 chapters till the end of the Hemshech. Again, 5 and 5. Kuntris Purim and kuntris Beis Nisan, I should say. And there was the kuntris Yud Gimel Shvat, which was after Yud Shvat. But in the kuntris but this continued, and later became what we call Sefer HaMamorim Tovshin Yud Aleph. And many people wonder, Tovshin Yud Aleph, you see Mamorim the Frierdiker Rebbe. These are Mamorim given out by the Rebbe of primarily Tovshin Yud Aleph is Mamorim from Tofresh Tzadik Dalet, and the Rebbe continued publishing it, and with his introduction, he would always write a very beautiful introduction, the Maimers, some sichos, and in most cases Minhagim customs that he added. So one of the kuntresim, the kuntris Pei Dalet, I believe, kuntris Pei Hey, he writes hashmotis, things that were missing from kuntris Pei Dalet, and in that place he adds this famous paragraph that later was reprinted in Sefer Minhagim, and it's also printed in Keser Shem Tov in the Hisofis and Editions section 198. And what does he say? The following. So we're talking about today's day, from the Baal Shem Tov. And the Rebbe says he took this was printed originally in a Sefer called Ginzei Nistaris, in Tofresh Pei Dalet, which would be 1924, was printed in Yerushalayim, a sefer called Ginzei Nistaris, page 50, section 1, Sivkot and Kuf Tes, and it says from the Baal Shem Tov. What we call the day after Yom Kippur Gotz Nomen, in Yiddish Gotz Nomen, B'Shem Hashem, is because Shem Havaya, Shem Kutchabrichu, the names, as soon as you designate a name that relates to God, that's already referring to the way the godliness relates to the worlds. Even in the emanation, the world of Atzilus, even the world of emanations. But Latzmusei, like any name, a name is only related to someone who calls you by the name, to another, to a Zulas, to another. So it relates to Ishtalshus, which would be not another, but it would be something that is not purely godliness on its own, but godliness as it relates to existence. Achlatz musay. When you're dealing with atzmusay, the core divine, it's not possible to call him by name. Shum shem shebeil. There's no name that can describe him because he's beyond name. He's beyond description. Now, if someone sins, God forbid, what do? They create a wound, a pagam in Shem Havaya. And Yimei HaSlichas, which is the days before an Elul, the end of Elul, and then of course Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, we pray. What do? We go Lifnei Havaya Elkaim. We go to a place that's higher than Havaya because in order to correct a wound, to repair a wound, you need to go to a higher place. You go Lifnei Havaya, meaning you're going to a place that's higher than the name Havaya where the wound happened. Havaya is, as I said, the divine as it relates to existence. There's a wound. So you go to a deeper place that's beyond the wound. And that's why the Machas Yom Kippur, the day after Yom Kippur, doesn't have a specific name. Not Havaya, not Adnei, only say God's name. So you say it's a name, but it doesn't have a specific identity that can define it in relation to existence. Essentially meaning that we're still now in the so-called, I want to say shadow, but we're still in the aura of Yom Kippur. And Yom Kippur reached Atzmusei, the core of the divine, that's higher than any expression of a name, and that's why we call it God's name. Now, interesting that Rebbe brings in a footnote in this Minhagim when he quotes the sites, he says from Sefer Eshla Avram, was written by the Rav Tzaddik from Putshach, Elkaim in Shulchan Aruch. It's a Sefer on Shulchan Aruch. Siman Tafresh Chavdal. There's the laws of the days after the halachas after Yom Kippur, between Yom Kippur and Sukkot. So he says he brings a different explanation in the name of the Baal Shem Tov. And the Rebbe says, Yesh Latavich, we can reconcile it with this explanation. What does he say there? He says there, because this is the day, the first day after the Chassidus Applied, when we no longer say Hamelech, we no longer say Hamelech HaKodesh, we say Hakel HaKodesh. We go back saying Hakel HaKodesh. So that's why it's God's name, because it's Hakel. Hamelech HaKodesh is a particular definition, Melech, because we're crowning God as king. But then on this day, he says, you start saying Hakel HaKodesh, and that's why it's called God's name. Now, how the Rebbe meant to reconcile it, not so clear. But perhaps you could say, but because we're entering, in other words, Yom Kippur is beginning to bring down the day after Yom Kippur is beginning to bring down the transmission of the holiness of Yom Kippur into Hakel HaKodesh, into the name. So it's still God's name, but it has that relationship with the name, not completely beyond altogether. So basically, you have three levels. You have the level of Yom Kippur Lefnei Havaya that's completely beyond any name, like we say Anechi Lo Yisramiz. It's not hinted to or alluded to Lo B'Shemeis, Lo B'Shem Case, not in any letter or any description at all. Then you have God's name, which is God's name, bringing it into the world of name, and then that will continue to be nimshach into actual names of Havaya and Adnai and so on, which already begin to relate, bring the divine dimension, the core divine, into existence. This is the haskalah of it, the chassidus of it. In practical terms, and to apply it to our lives, why is it so significant? Because we know that we are now in a time of the year, which is, of course, a very significant time, where the transition from Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, what's called the Yomim Noraim, the days of awe, to the days of Simcha, which is going to be in 4 days from now, Sukkot. So we know the first 10 days of Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur. Then come 4 days, and then the 15th, on the full moon of Tishrei, begins Sukkot. So Chassidus, citing from the Zohar, brings that the 2 halves of the month, which is why it's called, is like Yira and Ava, based on the pasuk in Shir HaShirim, in Song of Songs, where he speaks about Anila Deidi V'Deidi Li, the relationship between Knesset Yisrael, between the divine and the souls. So he brings the expression, Smeili Tachas L'Reishi, my left hand, his left hand was under my head in an embrace. And with his right hand, he embraced me. So the left hand is Smeil, that's the first half of the month, that's Gvura, Yom Neraim, Yira. So even though there's a deeper simcha, but it's Vigila Barada, it's a simcha that you're standing in front of the king, you don't make somersaults and you don't dance. You have an inner joy, but you stand with awe and respect. The second half of the month, Man Simchaseinu, Bekesa Liyem Chagenu. Whatever was concealed now comes out revealed in Sukkot in a exuberant expression and explosion of joy, which only grows day to day, all the way to Simchas Torah. And that's Yeminit Chesed. That's already Chesed. Chesed is Simcha. It's a revealed joy. So it's revealing the intense awe in a revealed way. Which is the first day after Yom Kippur, is the Gotz Nomen. That's the day where this transition begins, which is why it's called Gotz Nomen. And in another Sikha, I believe it is Mitzvah Yom Kippur Tavshin Yud, which would be the last Tavshin Yud Sikha from the Frierdiker Rebbe. He says that the 4 days between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, 4 days, is connected, corresponds to the 4 letters of Yud, K, Vav, K. So therefore, so that fits in here, because Yud would be God's name. It's like the beginning. Yud is only a dot. It's not yet manifest in a full, defined way, but it's already a dot. It's already some expression. So you say God's name, like we spoke about. So there's that. So the whole point of this is that we should be able to take the connection that the fundamental connection of a soul to the divine, the Yechida of Achaz B'Shana of Yom Kippur, and you want to bring that into our daily lives. It's still in Tishrei, it's still in a joyous way. We still have to transition it into the secular, so-called material world after the month, this month filled with holidays. But in the transition, in this case, what we're talking about is Yom Kippur, of course, is the holiest day of the year. We go into the Holy of Holies. So in applied terms, that would be you're going into the deepest place of your soul where you can connect to the core of who you really are. But then the challenge is, okay, that was one day. What happens the next day? Comes this day and says there's an interface between bringing that core and expressing it into our more revealed lives. And that's why it says, when it talks about the 4 species on Sukkot, the first day, so it says, because these 4 days, because Jews are busy with mitzvahs, gathering esregim and lulavim and building a sukkah and so on, they don't have time for any negative things. Yom Kippur cleanses the slate because we go back to our core, the Kirav Amoyer al Anitzus, where the soul connects to its purest quintessential self, as it connects to the divine. Then you have 4 days which are still saturated with that energy, starting from God's name, God's Nomen, which is today the Yud. We carry it into the Hey, the second day, the Vav and the Hey, which is out of Sukkot, and that leads us straight into the Sukkot, the joy of Sukkot. So in the psychological terms, essentially it means that no matter what you've gone through in your life, Yom Kippur, of course, creates a clean slate. I just heard a very beautiful story of one of the Russian Bochrim that he came out of Russia. First time he went to Yechidus. So Russia was a very difficult life. And he asked the Rebbe for a tikkun for all the things that he may have done wrong while he was in Russia. He wants to begin to have a tikkun, a way of repairing all that. So the Rebbe showed him a piece of paper, a blank piece of paper, and the Rebbe said, this is how you have to look at your life. That it's a blank, it's a clean slate. And from here on, what you have to worry about. Do not think about the past. This is exactly what the Yom Kippur is, which is why we wear white. We go back to the white, which is the pure color, the real essential color. All other colors are a bending of the prism of light, and there's some tziyur, some shape and form. White is the pure. We're not talking about the color white as in the dye white, but pure white, the natural white light that is the essence of all light. So we go back to that white place, and we wear the Kohen Gadol wore not the colorful garments, but the garments made out of linen, white linen, all representing the Yalbinu, which is the whitening of our sins, which is symbolic of the idea of a clean slate, like freshly fallen snow. And the question is, the challenge is, can we maintain that? And the answer is we can. It doesn't mean we'll be perfect, but we have the power, because Yom Kippur translates into the next days. And when we take that and turn it into a joyous experience and begin preparing for the great joy of Sukkot, we're celebrating essentially that whiteness, that purity that we all are. So often we get broken and soiled and hurt by life that we forget about that purity. And we think we become, some people will call damaged goods, some people will say I'm already old and wrinkled, or I'm not the way I was. My idealism has been somewhat diminished. Dreams have been dashed. Promises have been broken. People go through life. There are many things that wear us down. And we have to remember that the soul never ages. A soul only gets more vibrant. If anything is sensing of aging or a sense of deterioration or a sense of resignation, that's all coming from the Yetzer Hara. It's all coming from that voice inside of us that succumbs and allows itself to be subject to the elements and the gravitational pull of material world. But if you connect to the soul, which is what we do in Yom Kippur in the fullest sense of the word, we connect to the soul of all souls, Yechida, Neshama Sheba Neshama, in the purest way with the 5 prayers and the 5 tefillahs ending with Ne'ilah, where all the gates are open and you can reach the deepest core. It's essentially reminding us and telling us that that's who you really are. You've entered into the real you. And the rest of it is all superimposed. All the negative or all of the other feelings that are not as hopeful, that's superimposed. So Yom Kippur, however, cannot remain in the Yom Kippur. You want to translate it. So that's why we bring it into now a joyous experience. So it's not just we say L'chaim and we fabring, and we dance and we sing. No. It's a celebration of the real you that you've just experienced in Yom Kippur, and now turn it into a regimen, turn it into a system. It's a system of now bringing it into joy. So the sanctity and that holiness and that type of unity, an achaz b'shana of Yom Kippur, now we're bringing into our diversified life, which is translated through a joy. Now remember, it's still Tishrei. Tishrei is still the letters Reishis. Reishis means it's still the central nervous system, and like the head of the brain is the central nervous system that controls the rest of the body. The same thing that's in space, the same thing in time, Rosh Hashanah. And Reishis, Tishrei in general, are Meyodim Klolim, as Chassidus says. They are central nervous system holidays. In Rosh Hashanah we receive Malchus, sovereignty that then transmits to the entire year, Kabbalah Sale for the entire year. Yom Kippur, Kedusha, and sanctity for the entire year. And Sukkot, we reap and we draw, V'shafta mayim b'sasim, we draw joy and celebration for the entire year. However, when you break it down in the head itself, in Tishrei itself, there's the 2 halves, where the first half is awe and respect, and the second half is love and expression and joy. So this day is literally the transition, the interface between Yom Neroim as that lead us into the Yemei Simchas Man Simchasenu of Sukkot. And as I explained, in personal terms, it means that we have the capacity to actually bring it into a real celebration. Celebrate what? Think about who you are. Yom Kippur was meant to reveal who you are. Now think about it and celebrate with it. And when we prepare the Sukkah, and then we prepare the Dal Minim, I'm leading this into the next, since Sukkot will be beginning this coming Wednesday night, I want to transition this into a Chassidus Applied to Sukkot as well. So as we come into the Sukkot and we prepare now the Sukkah and we prepare the Lulav and the Esrog and the Dasim and the Aravis, what are we doing? So Chassidus explains the Sukkah is a makif and the Dal Minim is a pnimi. What does that mean? That the makif is we sit in a Sukkah, it's a mitzvah that surrounds us and completely encompasses us. And Teshvu came to Duru, which means we would dwell there just as we dwell in our homes, and we do so because we remember, it reminds us of the times we were in the wilderness, where we sat, where Hashem says, "L'man yedu deresechem." Why do you sit in a sukkah? For you should know. It's part of the kavon of the mitzvah of sukkahs, to know and to remember, and to intimately know that man yedu deresechem, that b'sukkah se shafti, that I protected you and I settled you, I sheltered you. In Sukkot, when we left Mitzrayim, the Gemara in Sukkot, there's 2 opinions what that means. Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Akiva, whether one says it means Anani HaKovid, that these are the clouds of glory that God protected the Eden the 40 years in the wilderness. And Rabbi Akiva says it refers to the actual tents that they lived in, the booths. So of course the question is asked, what, according to Rabbi Akiva, then, according to Rabbi Lezer, it makes sense that we sit in the sukkah and remind ourselves of God's protection over us. But the booths, what is God's protection of there? And the answer is also obvious. The answer is that, on the contrary, why do they sit in booths? Because they completely trusted God. So both opinions is understanding that the real trust and the real security in our lives is not the man-made structures and the castles and the towers that we build, and we've seen, unfortunately, how these are all prone to being destroyed, and they're all man-made. Therefore, they're all mortal and they're all destructible. As the joke goes, the Titanic was built by professionals, and the Ark was built by an amateur. But so what do we declare and what do we remember on Sukkot? Sukkot says Shafti, that the real security of a person is not the man-made walls, and not the luxuries, and not the comforts of your home. That you could be even in a hut with a flimsy walls and with a sukkahs, a schach, which is the covering that's made out of the vegetable world. And rain comes in, meaning that we're subject and we're exposed to the elements and we're vulnerable, but we know that it's b'tzila demem nusa. This is the shade of faith that God protects us as He protected us then. So Sukkot is that declaration, but it's in a form of makif. And as we just spoke about Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, the whole goal is to internalize it. So the next morning, v'lakachtem lachem b'yem arishan, lachem, Chassidus says, you shall take, what's lachem? Lakachtem. B'yem arishan, why do you need lachem? Lepnimi yuschem. You take the lulav and the esrig and the hadassim and arovis all bound together and you bring it close to your heart. You're internalizing the makif that began the night before, Sukkot, into pnimi. What you see from all of this is that this is such an eloquent and beautiful tapestry of understanding the processes. It's not just holidays that are technical and mechanical, but they reflect profound cosmic and mystical meaning. And the personal application of it is the same idea, that every time you have, that the whole process of growth is like, for example, when you have a teacher and a student. This teacher-student teaching the student a new idea. How does it work? You hear the new idea for the first time for the students a little above his head, or a lot above his head. It's in a form of makif. He may have received something, but then he begins to work on it. What is the working? Yeshiva, that's sitting in yeshiva, and you internalize it, and you integrate it into yourself. And then what happens when you integrate it? Then you're ready to receive a higher makif, deeper wisdom. Just as an example, and everything in life is that way. Relationships, a healthy relationship is a dynamic one. The two people are close as they are, they grow. Human beings grow, we change. So closeness means that every day there's a new mystery, there's a new mountain to scale. And as you scale that mountain, the new makifim, new horizons rise, like climbing a mountain. As you climb higher, you suddenly see a new horizon. So as you internalize, there's always new dimensions and new vistas and panoramas to explore. And the same thing is in our personal lives. Growth is based on that type of fluid motion, fluid movement, that we're always growing in that way. Makif panimi. So Rosh Hashanah gives us the birth of the existence and the day of judgment, the day when the entire world renews its contract with God. The new moon. Tikka b'cheda shefer, the new moon. 10 days pass and we build Binyan HaMalchut, we build that structure, but it's all still in a form of awe and respect because we're crowning God as King. Yom Kippur is called Rosh Hashanah and Bepnimius, Chassidus explains, based on the Pasuk in Yecheskel. So Yom Kippur is still that type of energy, even deeper now, because we travel now through the 10, all the way to Yechida, to the core of our souls. But that's the core connection we have. Now we need to internalize and bring that, because at the end of the day, Yom Naraim is more all-encompassing. So now come the 4 days, you bring it into Yud K, Vov K, and then it comes into the Makif of Sukkah, and then leads into the Pnimius of the 4 Minim. And then every day that escalates and that grows, higher Makifim, which is also why we go around by Hashainis every day of Sukkot. We go around the Bima again, Makif. And what happens as we go later, Hashaina Rabbah is the Hashaina Rabbah, there's the 7 Makifim, and then, of course, Hakofis is, again, we go around the Bima with the goal of bringing these Igulim, in the language of Kabbalah, to bring these transcendent energies that are initially beyond us and all-encompassing and are like circle us and internalize it into Yeshur, into our personal lives. And, of course, all this is then meant to be unpacked throughout the entire year. This can be turned into a model in any element of a person's growth, whether you're dealing with difficult situations, and you need to have some new energy. This is how the energy process works. Or whether you're just growing, I don't want to say just, when you're improving or looking for ways to become a much greater person. Any area in life requires this type of processing. First, going from a more awe state to a state of joy and revelation, and from a makif state to a pnimidik state. This is just one of many applications that can be applied to this, and one of many different explanations that Chassidus gives for the idea of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and of course Sukkot, and the days of Sukkot. We will of course be continuing this discussion next week, which is going to be Chalamayt Sukkot, and then I'll talk about the second half of Sukkot as we go further into it. But this is somewhat some taste of Chassidus Applied toward Sukkahs and the Daled Minim, and something that we can all, in some way, personalize. I want to just add a little more to make it a little more palatable, how each of us can personalize this both in our own lives and also in the lives of our children. When you sit in the Sukkah, you can explain this to your children even, and to yourself. We're sitting in a Sukkah surrounded, like think of it like a hug. A hug is a more all-embracing thing. It's not yet internalized. Someone hugs you. When God hugged us, when we left Mitzrayim, through the clouds of glory, or the huts, these were all encompassing, which we all need. Just like a child in his mother's womb for 9 months is completely submerged in the embryonic fluids, and as such, the nurturing that is necessary. So think of the Sukkah as the nurturing, the overall nurturing. We're now in the presence of divine presence that allows us to experience something far greater than we are. That's a makif, the makif of Sukkah. We'll talk later about makifim, the bina, the specific detail of this makif. You're surrounded by it. But life also is not just enough to be surrounded, you also have to be personal. It has to translate into something specific. You can hug and love somebody, but then you need to feed them, or you need to dress them, or you need to protect them, and you need to teach them. That requires a detailed implementation. So the makif of a Sukkah then is followed by a pnimi, where we take the lulav, the esrog, the lulav, the hadasim, and the arovas. We know these four correspond to the entire spectrum of human beings. The esrog, which has a taste and a smell, reflects the people who have scholarship and mitzvahs. Taste is teira, because taste is something internal. Taste. Mitzvahs is more reach. It's not a mitzvah. You don't eat a mitzvah. You don't consume a mitzvah. You do a mitzvah, but it gives you a pleasant, refines you. In mitzvahs, they were given in order to refine us, so we give off a beautiful aroma, spiritual aroma and aura. That's the esek, the person who has both Torah and mitzvahs. The lulav is the other way, has one and not the other. The lulav has a taste but no smell. The arova the hadasim have a smell but no taste. And the arova has no taste or no smell. So those reflect the three other personality types. When you have taste without smell, that would be you have Torah but not mitzvahs, or not enough mitzvahs and ma'asim tevim umeirim. The hadasim have a smell, so it's mitzvahs but not Torah. There are people who are excellent in doing mitzvahs and baalei chesed and kindness, but they don't have as much scholarship, so it's not that internalized. The lulav is Torah and not lacking the total focus on the mitzvahs. It has, but it's not enough. And then arova is the simple person. Arova has neither taste nor smell. So it's someone that revealed, you don't see any qualities. And what do? We take all four together. Baguda achas. And that's necessary. Then the esrog cannot be complete if it doesn't have the other three. So we take all four together, we join them unity, but unity of the specifics. We're not just saying unity that's makif, a unity that we have all four bound together, all four types. And each of us has, either we fit in one of these four categories, or we have all four different times in our lives. And we bind them together in a classic unity, which connects to the unity of sitting in one sukkah. Ruyin kol Yisrael leisha b'sukkah achas, like it says. All Jews are worthy of sitting in one sukkah, which means a sukkah makif can surround them all, but surrounding is not enough. And this can be translated, I said, even to children. Surrounding is the idea that you show love to someone in the general sense. And then there's the pnimi where you actually vernemzach with them. You figure out what they need, their specific needs that are different than one another. Parents love their children, love all their children. But then there's taking that love and translating it to specific needs that each child has. That's one way to explain makif and pnimi, and can be explained in many other ways and many other applications. That's one example. And this grows day to day throughout Sukkot. And of course, all with joy, because simcha, that's exactly what simcha is about. Simcha is when you have the unity. As we say, Barchenu Avinu Kolanu Kechad, when the children are unified, God is besimcha, and we're besimcha. When people are not unified, God forbid, it's hard to be joyous. Family is not united. People don't speak to each other, or there's some dissent, or discord, or worse, divisiveness. So unity is connected to simcha, as well as the unity in the collection. We all sit in one sukkah, which is an equalizer. So there's the equalizer and there's the specifics. That's the makif pnimi dance that goes out throughout Sukkot. And if you look more in Kabbalah, especially where Chassidus explains it, you see this theme continuously replayed. If you want more information on this, because it's limited time here, check out 60 Days, my book 60 Days, The Spiritual Guide to the High Holidays, especially this period in time, explaining this whole makif pnimi balance in the context of these days that we are in right now. Okay. With that, let us go to the first question. Well, before I go to the first question, I do want to point out, somebody sent me a nice little email today for this episode, so I want to read it to you. This is from Chaim Vital, writes in Sefer Taimei HaMitzvahs, Parshas Re'eh. He says, about buying the things of like mitzvahs, like lulav, esrig. So he writes things that he saw by the Arizal, his great master, the Arizal. So he writes, Re'isi Lamedi, Arizal, that he would give those, the merchants that would sell lulav and esrig, he would not, whatever they asked for, the first time he would give them that price. There was no negotiations, no discussions. Sometimes, he says, he actually put his wallet down by them with the money, and they should take whatever they want. Okay, very beautiful minhag. Now, of course, people say, one second, what about if a merchant is not honest? Number one is, Al Kol Yisrael B'Cheskes Kashrus. We're obviously talking about merchants that are honest, that is all trusted. But it was interesting because a mitzvah, he didn't want to go bargain about a mitzvah. Again, I'm not suggesting that we have to do the same apply, we have to do it with discretion depending on the merchants you're dealing with, but I still felt it's important to hear this because when it comes to being someone that is honest, there's a certain type of being open and just allow whatever that mitzvah costs. Now, I'm not selling asregim or lolim, so this has no self-interest involved, there's no self-serving statements here. I just thought it was a nice thing to share as we go into these days of Sukkot. Obviously, God forbid, people who do price gouging and other type of unfair behavior, they have their cheshbon, and that's not something that we have to just to buy into. Find the merchant that's honest if you find that. But even if by mistake, God forbid, you did end up spending because the person did that, remember, ala nizik fanigzum min hashamayim. God forbid, I don't want to say it's a nizik. Since you did a mitzvah, there's no mitzvah ein nizak, and there's no way you can be hurt by it. So at the end of the day, you will get your schar, even if the person did something that wasn't so appropriate. But obviously, use discretion and intelligence, but still keep in mind what the Barizal says. There's more to what he says in this regarding Bechlal about tzedakah in general, this piece, the Chaim Vital, but so I'll read it to you briefly. I'll read it in English. As for philanthropy and generosity, I observed that my master was not particular that his own clothes be terribly fancy, that he only ate very little, and regarding his wife's expenses, however, he would dispense funds according to her wish. Okay, now if any woman listening to this, if you want to use it against your husband, I wouldn't say it as against, just quote the Arizal, and I'm sure they'll do it b'simcha. My master, meaning that Arizal, would give charity with great joy and good-heartedness, open-handedly, and sometimes he would not even look to see if there would be any money left for himself or not. And then he said, my master said that every commandment is associated with one of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and that when someone performs a commandment, the mitzvah, the letter associated with that mitzvah shines on his forehead, replacing the letter shining on his forehead from the previous mitzvah he performed. This letter remains on his forehead only as long as he is performing the mitzvah with which it is associated. Afterwards, it is absorbed within him. Again, makif pnimi. However, if he performs the mitzvah of tzedakah, the letter associated with it does not disappear as fast as the letters associated with other mitzvahs, but rather continues to shine on his forehead the whole week. This is the mystical meaning of the verse: his righteousness endures forever. Tzidkoscha emid la'ad in Tehillim. And then he speaks about the lulav and esrig that I mentioned before. He told me that one should not bargain over the prices one pays to do mitzvahs. And the Shcherbina B'Yechei says the same thing in the Zohar. Okay, so I thought it was a good thing to share before Sukkot. The Rebbe also brings from the Siddur, from the Mitler Rebbe, which is like based on the Maimorim of the Alter Rebbe on Siddur, that it's a mitzvah to add increase in tzedakah erev Sukkot. So let me bring that custom as well. The next question is one about Lubavitch practices versus normative halacha. I don't like that title, but that's the way the person wrote it. So I'll comment on that in a moment. And this is the question. It's a multi-dimensional question about, dear Rabbi Jacobson, I hope you are inspiring and meaningful Rosh Hashanah, and I wish you all the best for 5778. I wanted to bring up some questions regarding Lubavitch Hanhogas, which seem to conflict with normative halachic practice. And he brings three things. I'll talk about one now, the others I'll deal with another time, because it's more relevant. This one's relevant. First is not sleeping in a sukkah. Two is davening late in the morning. Third is eating shud shlishis on Shabbos, the way Chabad does it. So I'll focus on the first one here because we're coming into sukkahs. Not sleep in the sukkah, which is pertinent to this time of year. I'm aware that Chassidus explains that the sukkah houses a lofty spiritual level. I believe it is called makifim de bina. Yes, you're right. And sleeping in that zone would be inappropriate. I also recall learning an explanation that the Rabbeim would not sleep in the sukkah for this reason. And as Chassidim, we follow the Rabbeim, even if we are not able to detect the spiritual level ourselves. Can you please confirm that my understanding is correct? And please explain why we are to follow the Rebbe in this instance. I believe there are other minhagim practiced by the Rabbeim which Chassidim do not follow. Also, as an additional question, if this spiritual level is indeed disturbed by human sleep, I would say the other way around. This level disturbs human sleep. Why would halacha, which is the divine will, prescribe such an activity? Okay, great question. And unfortunately, this question has been used by some people for own selfish purposes. The famous dollars where Rabbi Kahana from Yerushalayim came to the Rebbe and said that he wants the Rebbe to explain to him why Chabad doesn't sleep in a sukkah in Man HaShalom. Because there are people who have tinus. And he was referring to Panovich and other places where they had these complaints that Chabad is not sleeping in a sukkah. And the Rebbe, instead of answering the question, got very upset, visibly, and said the whole thing is based on machlekes. Because the fact is that the source of it comes from the Mittler Rebbe, who definitely saw it by his father, the Alter Rebbe. If they accept the Alter Rebbe as a pesach, as an authority, that doesn't matter whether we have an explanation or not, and that's all that matters. And the Rebbe refused, as much as he insisted of Kahana for an explanation, the Rebbe refused to give it, which was obviously why. Because the Rebbe saw the whole thing as machlekes. If it's based on machlekes, whatever explanation he'll give, there'll always be another question. So I think it's important to mention that because some people ask questions, l'kanta, not with the intention of an answer, but rather just to complain. Just let's keep something very much in mind. How does Chabad behave regarding to a sukkah? The only community that will sit in a sukkah even when it rains, even when it's completely uncomfortable. So to say that suddenly with being makel and being lenient when it comes to sleeping, the same Rabbeim, they're not sleeping in a sukkah, were machmir not to drink a drop of water outside of a sukkah. Show me that type of stringency. So clearly, based on that, you understand that they're not sleeping has nothing to do with because they might want to be comfortable. It has to do with deeper reasons, even if you don't understand it. Now, the second point is that the Rebbe Taka did explain it in a classic sikha in the night of the second day of Sukkot, and then Simchas Torah and Shabbos Bereshis, three Farbrengens. The Rebbe discussed it in Tovshin Lamed. Tovshin Lamed. We're now in Tovshin Ayin Zayin, so that would be 47 years ago. Tovshin Ayin Ches, 48 years ago. 48 years ago, the Rebbe explained it. The equivalent would have been 1969 because the English year didn't change yet. And that was later printed in Likutei Sichos, volume 29, page 211 and on. So everyone can go look it up. It's a sikha, a nigladika sikha that explains, well, nigladika. It's based, of course, on facts. We have to know the facts. The facts are that there was, the Frierdiker Rebbe says in the sikha in Tafrei Sadik Tez, the first night of Sukkot, and similarly in the first night of Sukkot of Tavshin Hey, these are printed, talks about how the Mittler Rebbe heard that some people were sleeping in a sukkah and he called them in and gave it to them. So it's makifim. Another expression, sometimes the expression is, how could you sleep in makifim de bina? He knew the Shulchan Aruch, and he knew that there was no two opinions. Shulchan Aruch says, Teishru came to do that you should eat, drink, and sleep. And there's no second opinion. And the Alter Rebbe brings it too. And yet he said that. So first we know there's a Rebbe, a Pesach also. So he says that's enough, as I mentioned before. But the Rebbe went on to explain, how do you explain this enigma? How could it be, fine, makifim de bina, how could it be that the inyan pnimi, the ruchnius of the sukkah should actually prevent you from keeping the mitzvah? Because there is a mitzvah to sleep there. The Rebbe goes a longer explanation. I'll just tell you a few key points, and you can go look it up yourself in the sources I just gave, and I'll give you a few more sources in a moment. The point first, the Rebbe starts explaining that that the fact is that there's the concept if a person is in that situation, how could you sleep makifim the bin is mitzdayer, is pain. Why? Because he senses this level of ruchnius, and he can't bring himself to sleep there. It causes him pain to stay there. And if you're mitzdayer, you don't have to be even sit in a sukkah, let alone sleep. But the Rebbe says still, but how could we be deprived? How could something like that? Why would Abish to make him says a mitzvah to sleep in the sukkah and then tell you the sukkah is makifim the bin, and then you can't bring yourself to sleep? So he goes first. He brings one consideration that the Ragachover says that shina b'sukkah is not really the same level mitzvah as eating in the sukkah. It's only that really that you're not allowed to sleep outside of a sukkah, but it's not that you have to sleep in the sukkah. So that's why you don't make a bracha on it and a few other details. So bottom line is, if not sleeping in a sukkah, there's not the ikar ha-mitzvah, but the Rebbe negates that, and then comes away with the bottom line saying that you see in the Gemara, famous Gemara, Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, it says, Leitam, they never slept. And when they did sleep, they would drowse off on each other's shoulders as they danced at night. And from the Gemara it's clear they didn't go into a sukkah to drowse off. So how could all these Tanoim, it says that they danced and they drowsed off, not in a sukkah. So the Rebbe explains that there's the concept that you could do the whole mitzvah of sukkahs even if you don't sleep in a sukkah. Now it's not a mocker direct. I mean, that's actually a mocker for actually not sleeping in a sukkah. If you see that fact that they danced, and it's appearance that it wasn't necessarily in a sukkah. So Taken Lekutei Sichos, volume 17, page 272, in a footnote, he says that perhaps that's a source for not sleeping. However, even if you don't have a source, we have the Mitler Rebbe. The question is that a contradiction to halacha? So the first thing is, because he said it, and the Alter Rebbe clearly and the other Rabbeim did not sleep in a sukkah, and there are other custom people, other custom not Chabad that also don't, that's enough. But the question is, how could be deprived of a mitzvah? So the Rebbe explains, the mitzvah is completed completely when you eat and drink and do everything you have to do in a sukkah. The not sleeping in it does not take away from the mitzvah. But then comes the big question, one second, the Mitler Rebbe felt makifim the bina. What about the rest of us? We're completely oblivious. So the Rebbe goes on to explain, because we heard from the Mitler Rebbe that's makifim the bina, and as the Rebbe says, it brings in that psyche, he says that once they heard that, there's mitzdayer, there's pain, that they don't feel it. As the Rebbe brings in that psyche. That's one level of mitzdayer. He brings another interesting point, he says, let me just read it inside. So the pain of not feeling it, or the pain that he doesn't feel that the pisgim, the word that the Mitler Rebbe said is affecting him. The Rebbe went on, Tov Shel Lamed, and said, what happens if you don't even have pain over that? So he says, then you have pain over not having pain over not having pain. And the Rebbe says, as many levels as you need, when you hear the story, you have pain over the fact that you don't feel it, that you don't feel as many levels as you need, until you finally say, you know what, I don't feel comfortable to sleep in a sukkah, that I don't feel, and have pain over the fact that I don't feel all these feelings. The bottom line is that there's a clear makar from the Rabbeim, and there's an explanation how it's not a contradiction to the halacha shabbat of the halacha, I should say, of not fulfilling. It does not deprive us from the mitzvah of sukkah. Now, in addition, there's a letter from the Rebbe in Igros Kodesh, volume 11. Which goes back already to the year Tafshin Tezvav, 24th of El, where the Rebbe says briefly about sukkahs that it's that about sleeping in a sukkah. Harbi yesh lahara, there's a lot to elaborate on this. Elkaim came in a footnote. He says from the Nekudis is one shlilas dover bozeh b'sukkah. Make sure not to do something embarrassing in a sukkah. And the tzich of Tafrei Tzadik Test, the Frierdiker Rebbe speaks about that. That we don't adamud le'elam, a person is always responsible even when they sleep. So if you're Baal Madrega, which is how he explains, by the way, the people before the Mitler Rebbe, that even makifim the bina, they also were able to deal with that. But in our generations, especially after Chabad Chassidus and later generations, you can end up doing something that's embarrassing or is mavaza the sukkah. That's one thing. And the second thing is mitzdayer. So the Rebbe hints to some of these ideas that we talked about. But I would definitely refer you to look up all these sichos and understand it more comprehensively. The bottom line is that nothing is just some type of leniency, God forbid. The whole sikh is based on that the hiddur was mamish to not a drink of water. So definitely the sleeping has some deeper thing. But what makifim debina is, we'll talk about soon at the end of this episode. Let us move now to another question. Ayin Hara. As I said, the other questions that you asked, we'll move to another episode because it's not negated to Sukkah. Let's talk about Ayin Hara. Something I've talked about already in the past. By the way, for Sukkot, I want to refer you to previous episode 84. A lot of what we discussed here, some of these points were made then, but maybe more in different angle and so on. This is the cross-reference that all these episodes were already in episode 182 of MyLife, thank God, with your help and your questions and feedback. So here's a good opportunity here's the place to pose any question in a complete anonymous forum, meaningfullife.com/mylife. There you'll also find the ability to find the archives and all these cross-references that I'm making. Ayin Hara, I've also discussed in episodes 99, 180. Should we be frightened of Ayin Hara? Hello, Rabbi Jacobson Sheikh here. Thank you. And the Eibishter should bench you with koyach and moyach to continue in your holy work. I have a question that's bothering me. Maybe you can shed some light on it. Did the Rebbe ever speak about Ayin Hara? I think we don't believe in it. I know one Jewish magazine, had an entire section about Ayin Hara. Their main thing was that 3/4 of the Beis HaChaim is of people who died because of Ayin Hara. Please, can you shed on what Chassidus or the Rebbeim said about this inyan? We daven every morning to keep us away from Pegera and Ayin Hara, so obviously there's something there. So do we need to be frightened? And if yes, what should we do to stay away from the Ayin Hara? Thank you again. Wishing all of Klal Yisrael Ksiva v'Chsima Tevim. As I said, I just spoke about this a few weeks ago in episode 180 as well as in 99. I'll just briefly state it again, and I'll compound the question. On one hand, we say Mazel Tov. Someone has a simcha. On the other hand, we say Ein Mazel Yisrael. There's no Mazel Yisrael. Yisrael is higher than all the constellation and Leich mitstagninu shalei, the Eibishter said to Avram. Go beyond the way the natural predispositions that nature imposes on us. So which one is it? We say Chodesh Adar, Mazalei Dogim, Mazalei Bari. The Jewish Mazel is strong. The month of Av, it's not so strong. The opposite. The answer is both are true, and it all depends where your head is. There's an expression that says in the Kehelis, it says, Der Heilig v'der bar, generation comes and generation goes. V'ein kol chodesh tachas hashemesh, and nothing new under the sun. And then he says, Kol ha'necholim helchem el hayam, all the rivers flow to the sea, and the sea never gets full. It's very depressing and seemingly negative until you learn the Chassidus in it. So, with that type of statement, there's nothing new under the sun, basically means just the names have changed, the people have changed, the places have changed. But Chassidus explains, Tachas HaShemesh, Ein Kol Chodesh. But L'mayla HaShemesh, higher than the sun, meaning higher than nature, higher than when you just follow the routines of the natural cycles and the seasons. Yes, there's nothing new. There's always going to be a winter and a summer, a winter and an autumn and a spring and a summer. The sun is going to rise, it will set, the moon will rise and set. This is Tmidin Kisidran, this is Layish Besu. It's unwavering. But there's a place higher than the sun, and that's what we are expected and we're able to reach. And there everything is new. Every moment, Chassidus explains, B'chol Yom is not just B'chol Yom, it means B'chol Rega. Every day, every moment, the universe is renewed. You say, well, it's nothing renewed, I see the same universe. So Chassidus explains, Chidush HaYeshenis, it's renewed in the same form it was. So if you're 20 years old, you're renewed as a 20-year-old, not as a 19-year-old. Okay, but or as a 1-year-old, or as a newborn. But it's renewed, but you need to place yourself in that way. So we have a choice. If you allow yourself to be subject to the laws of nature, so to speak, and then you say, you know what, this is the laws of nature, and what can I do? But we have the power as a neshama, chelik elakam amal mamish, to rise. Ein mazel Yisrael, Chassidus says that the mazel is ayin, the level of ein, not only no mazel, that the mazel is ayin, higher than yesh. And when we reach our state of bittul, that's why we say that the Ayin Hara only affects those that believe in it. So people ask, what does that mean? Either yes or no. Your belief in it gives it power. You allowed yourself to become vulnerable and subject to other people's whims. Yes, so there is the concept, and we do have times that we sprech up, or we protect ourselves with a mezuzah, or we protect ourselves with holy names as we do newborn children and so on. But that's because there is that concept, and sometimes we do succumb to that level, but we don't have to. And that's why it says there are aces semefs, there are aces b'shamayim, but you should not you should not follow those aces. We have the power to rise above it. We come to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, this new year. We're not praying to get rid of Ayin Hara. We're praying to rise to a place that you don't need to get rid of them because you're connected to the Eibishter. By the Eibishter, there's no Ayin Hara. Ein Ra Yerim L'mayla. Ra does not come down from above. Connect to that above, L'mayla Min HaShemesh, and you preempt the problems. So there's one way to solve things is through symptomatic medicine. There's some type of negative thing, an Ayin Hara. So you go find ways to correct it. But there's a much healthier and better way. Preventive medicine. Go back to the root. Go back to the engine room. Go back to Yom Kippur, the Yechidah that connects to the source of life, Chaim, and then automatically it preempts and avoids, in the first place, any type of problem. I remember when the Rebbe in Tovshem Emdal's Pekudei, he was speaking about, there was the dinner for Hatzolah. The Rebbe said, just by seeing an ambulance, that already prevents, that we shouldn't have the problem. Pas basali, because you have it ready. So when you know that the healing is there already, you don't have to even deal with it in the first place. That's the general gist of it, and the rest you can look up in those sources. Okay, now we went there. Let us talk about, is there prophecy among Gentiles? What are we to make of prophecy amongst righteous Goyim? During the early years of the USA, Dr. Rush, a prominent friend of both John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, had a dream about them both. Included in the dream was that they were to die nearly at the same time. And there's a link here to go see the dream. I actually didn't look it up. I trust you. Indeed, they both died 17 years later in different parts of the country on July 4th. What is to be made of that, if anything? So, let's start with the beginning. It says, Loi kam Yisrael, Moshe, Loi kam Novi b'Yisrael kamei Moshe. So the Medrash says, what I mean, Moshe? There was no Novi rose in Israel like Moshe. Why does it say Yisrael? Because not by Yisrael, by Goyim, it was Bilam. A Ferish Parsha, in Parsha Balak, a Bilam, a Novi. He's a Novi to the extent that even as much as he disliked Jews, he couldn't say anything against them because whatever God put in his mouth, that's what he had to say. So he's clearly a prophet. You have other non-Jewish prophets, even after Matan Torah. Before Matan Torah, you could say, there was no concept of Jew and Gentile. There's the Svarim about it, Prashas Drachim and other places. But fine, let's say that Avram was a Geder Yisrael in a certain way. The truth is, as I said, there was Nevuah, people of the Odom and Neach are not necessarily the Geder of Yisrael. But definitely after Matan Torah, you find Bilam and you find others. And they were not all good people. Because God can choose as a mouthpiece anyone he wishes. Bilam ended up giving us the greatest blessings possible, and it was actually the damage that he created. It was not as a prophet, it was more as a counselor, as an advisor. He gave good advice to Balak, he said, but as a prophet he couldn't. And he's the one that actually said when the non-Jews came running, what's happening when they heard the world trembling and they saw the birds silent during Sinai Matan Torah, he said, Hashem eiz la'amei yitin, Hashem yivarach, Hashem v'shalom. And the same thing with others that there's that clearly state there were prophets that were not Jewish. So I'm not sure why you don't have to go all the way to this fellow that you quoted. What was the fellow's name? Dr. Rush. Now, whether he was a prophet or not, I said it's possible to have prophecy by non-Jews. This doesn't mean that everybody who gets up and prophesies is a prophet. There are con artists, there are charlatans, there's snake oil salesmen, and there's a lot of synonyms for all this. So this doesn't mean that everybody gets up, for that matter, even by Jews too, someone gets up and says he's a prophet, who starts prophesying, doesn't make him a prophet. There are conditions, the Torah is very, very strict about what defines a prophet. But the bottom line is God can speak through anybody. And yes, whether it's prophecy or Ruach HaKodesh, it has happened also through non-Jews. As a matter of fact, in Shabbos Pasha B'Shalach, Tov Shemem, since you're mentioning the founding fathers, not about this Dr. Rush, whoever he was, but the Rebbe says there in Shalach Tov Shemem, he brings the Urim V'Tumim, Sefer Urim V'Tumim, from the Yavitz, that he brings there that, from Rabbi Yonashan Eibschitz. I was confused the two. From the Yonashan Eibschitz, the Urim V'Tum, where he explains that when people who wrote Torah, like Rambam or Rashi, even though they may not have consciously known everything they're saying, because Miyad Hashem, his skill, that Hashem worked through them, that when we're Medayik and we, in some precise wording, even if they themselves were not aware of it, like Moshe wasn't aware when he heard Rabbi Akiva was teaching. That's why he was disturbed until he heard Allah L'Meishim Sinai, that he was Kabbalah from Moshe, from Sinai. So in other words, the ideas could be there, and the teacher himself who's saying it, he's a channel for Hashem's words. So he may be saying things he himself may not fully appreciate or understand at the moment, and later can appreciate it even when another person reveals it. So the Rebbe said, Lahavdil, about the founding fathers, the same thing, about how when they founded this country on certain principles, he uses that Urim V'Tumim, which is, I won't call it Navi, but definitely on the borderline of a Ruach HaKodesh, or definitely channeling the divine plan. And why not? The divine plan can work through anybody. Harbid Drachim L'Makim. Even, unfortunately, we have times Parei was also a shliach, but it was the bad shliach. And he was punished because he did more than he had to do, or he didn't have to choose to do, whatever the reasons. But there is, let's talk for the positive, that there are many shluchim that throughout history that were God's messengers, and they weren't always necessarily Jewish. Next question. What should I do about my anxiety and addictions? I have generalized anxiety disorder, and I'll delete this word and call sexual addictions. And it's making me very depressed and socially anxious. I tried NoFap. NoFap is a site that tries to help people prevent from pornography and other things. But it makes me more anxious and depressed. I can't do the NoFap. My addiction is due to the anxiety. What shall I do? My life is crumbling. So we have a derech slula. We have a paved path and road how to deal with challenges like this. First of all, there's hundreds of letters of the Rebbe. I quote them very often in this MyLife because it answers many questions. The approach in general about anxiety, as we know from Tanya Perek Chavov, is that anxiety itself is the problem. Think of anxiety as the enemy. So it's like you have anxiety. Anxiety is the problem. Why? Because it causes you to become depressed. And that in turn causes you to become debilitated and demoralized. And you can't fight a war. You can't battle. Psychologically, when you feel like he brings there the example of two wrestlers. So how do you get rid of this anxiety? You understand it's your enemy. You have to fill your life with Kedusha. I don't know this individual, but I'll say, you have to find a shir in Torah. You have to be around people that are besimcha, simchas Chaim. Obviously, if there's something clinical, you may need to go to a doctor or someone that can prescribe medicine if that's necessary. But it has to be necessary. And find someone to speak to, a mashpia and a rav. There's no such thing, my life is crumbling, what shall I do? What shall you do? Find someone to speak to that you can trust. And if it's not that person, find another. Nobody can free themselves from these things. So we're going into a new year. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur gives a new chapter, a new book opens up, as I discussed earlier. Now's the time. Start learning something, learn Chassidus that talks about the neshama. Learn things that teach you about your soul, about you, that's beyond your anxiety, like we discussed before. That transcends it. Depending on what your life situation, whether you're working, I don't know if this is a family man, it's a bocher, or it's a woman, I can't know from what it says here. So what you have to do is find oir, ma'at er dechahar b'cheshech, as he explains in Tanya. But always have a selo charav and a knei lecha chaver. That's the basic answer to this. And that is something you could do. Will it happen? Will it be like a magic pill overnight? Not necessarily, but it's the beginning of the process. So I just wanted to talk about that. Okay. We also have a few more subjects to speak about. I see, again, time is always of essence, and time is always running out. But I do want to say one thing. We talk about davening. And I wanted to dedicate the next few episodes to continue the discussion about davening. Basically, the big question is, why don't we daven the way Chassidus expects of us? I spoke about the basics last week, which was about laziness, and most importantly, that we were never trained. I would go the other way. We weren't trained, we don't appreciate, we don't understand what means Avodah Shebelev, and we weren't trained to do it. And then comes the laziness part. We have to create a revolution, let's be very honest. Wherever you look in Chassidus, tefillah is absolutely a critical component in human growth, in serving God. It's the quintessential Aveda. Aveda Shebelev, an emotional maturity, an emotional conditioning. Intellectual conditioning, we are far more astute at. We learn, we have good minds, you learn Gemara, you learn Chassidus, whatever it is that you learn. But when it comes to emotional conditioning, emotional intelligence, emotional maturity, that's where we're lacking. If you're wired and you have it, but it doesn't grow. If you're not wired, you don't have it, and it also doesn't grow. This is an area that we need to work on. And as I said, I'm dedicated, this is a big part of what MyLife Chassidus Applied is all about. How do we grow? How do we become more refined? How do we become more godly? How do we become more connected and fulfilling our mission? And bringing healthy tools and skills into our lives instead of unhealthy ones, focusing on the right thing. So I want to, and I'm going to dedicate next week more at length, the next few weeks. I found the Teira Shalom from the Rebbe Rashab, which I read many times, but for some reason in dealing with this, he actually answers a question where somebody asks, and what happens, and how do you get connected to these ideas? And he talks about davening. I'll just begin by speaking, it's right in the beginning of Teira Shalom. I think it's Purim Tov Reish Nun Beis. I may be wrong, I'll look at it inside and we'll discuss it more at length. But I want to just say one thing to be Yetzirah here for this, and then to demonstrate the commitment to discuss this further. He says, you have to look at it, let's start with very Balabatish. Even if you're completely immersed in business, and you're very successful and that's where your whole chayes is, you need to sleep, right? You need to eat. And when you're sleeping, you're not involved in business. So why don't we see the same thing with davening? Even though you may run a business and you have other distractions, davening is also a necessity for the spiritual health of a person. That's what he says. Obviously, you can't compare lahavdil. I don't think he mentions lahavdil, but he's just giving you an example. That when you understand it as a necessity, then it becomes a priority. Right now, it's an option. Or you do it minimally, lip service, rush it, and so on. So we're going to discuss more because there's a whole conversation there between an individual that keeps asking the Rebbe Rashab, but how? What happens if it doesn't get through? What do you do? And we're going to go through those steps and I'll sum up that Teira Shalom. You can look it up, and if you'd like to look at it yourself, by all means. We will continue this discussion about davening and also read some feedback and comments that people have written to me over the years regarding this topic, which, as I said, we've discussed back all the way in the beginning of MyLife, close to the beginning, episodes 18, 19, and 20, if you want to look that up. Okay. There's two follow-ups I want to do, the Chassidus and then the essays. Yeah. The first follow-up is about Baal Teshuva. In episode 180, I spoke about Baal Teshuva being mistreated and second-class citizens. Someone took issue and wrote the following. Thank you for talking about the sister of Rabbi Simon, much appreciated. I have to point out, however, that I did not fully appreciate the way it was done. But BTs, as Baalei Teshuva, are not some alien species that require enormous amount of openness and boundless Ahavas Yisrael to accept. Yes, Bochrim and Hadar Torah are dressed strangely for the first few months that they are there. But then they became part of the community, or leave, because mostly said community has not reached out to them in meaningful ways. But I digress. When do they become part of the community? When they do become part of the community, they are mostly exemplary members of it. They are here because of love of the Rebbe and Yiddishkeit, not because it's just where they were born. So it's not an accident that they try harder. They dress more tzniusdik. They lament lack of Chassidish Ruach here in Crown Heights more than average residents. They reach out more. They mean what they do. Look at the Darat Torah alumni. What a sight. What a pride. Look at many Russian, Argentinian, American, and all over the world chevra. Dedication, seriousness, delight to see. This is the Rebbe's work like no other. And yet, all you manage to say is that we have to respect BTs because they changed their life, and we have to have Ahavas Yisrael for them, even if they are different, as illustrated by the story. How the heck, are they different? I don't know what was going on in Darat Torah in the 60s. I don't know what exactly that individual complaint might have been. To me, it sounds very backwards. I came to Darat Torah from Zal from my BT yeshiva overseas. I was appalled by lack of interest in learning. People were sitting there growing their behinds because their parents sent them there, no other reason. You're telling me about poor tiny Darat Torah having influence of any kind? So I don't know why you choose the story to illustrate anything really. Oh wait, I do know. The argument is this makes the Rebbe very angry, so stop. Sad if this is the only way to make people change their ways. To wrap it on a positive note, I commend you for picking inconvenient, quote-unquote, or rather relevant topics for discussion. Wishing you ksiv v'chsimeteva and good geben shtiyar. As you said, Achdus is a key, and Chassidus emphasizes Achdus melachatchila, like organs of one body. So while I read what you wrote, and I appreciate, and I agree with certain principles, but everything has to be she'el ke'inyan. I was answering a particular question. You seem to jump on my answer without knowing what I'm answering the question. The question was, why are Baalei Teshuva being treated as second-class citizens? And that's where I wanted to, those that do treat them that way, address that issue. That was my main focus. To talk about the qualities, I could talk about qualities of Baalei Teshuva, of Baalei Aveda as well, if you like, but most importantly, of people who are FFBs. And many people have qualities. That was not the focus, to talk about the qualities of Jews. Absolutely, I know Baalei Teshuva, I know people who are most exemplary and most beautiful people, but that was not the point of the discussion. The point was about the mistreatment, and that's what I want to address. And no, it was not a condescending or patronizing statement, have Avos Yisrael for them. It was the chutzpah to the basis of whole Chassidus is Avos Yisrael. How could you mistreat any Jew, let alone a Baalei Teshuva? So it's not about a Rachmanis case, because some of them are excellent. Some have challenges, like we all have, and there's some people who are born into the system and they have tremendous challenges. So this is not about a discriminatory statement of saying we have to treat, since they're second-class citizens, we have to bend over backwards to treat them nicely. No, this is not about affirmative action. This is about appreciating that we're all part of one nation. As far as what you say, I totally agree. There are many beautiful Baalei Teshuva I've learned from, have a lot to teach, are completely dedicated, but you should know there are also people born in the system that are also that way. And that's important to qualify as well. We all have to, bottom line, dedicate ourselves to grow in every possible way. And of course, as one, and understand and appreciate each other and learn from each other. I am not going to do the Shidduchim crisis because that keeps on popping up, but unfortunately, I hope the issue will be gone by next week or the next few weeks. If it's not, I'll address it. Okay. So let us go now to the Chassidus question. Let me just make sure. What is makifim de bina? I mentioned before that the Mitler Rebbe said makifim de bina. So the source for makifim de bina is actually in that psyche, as I told you, in volume 29. The Mitler Rebbe says Sukkah, he brings his seichens there me'er from a Moshe Papiros Makubal Os Samach Tezvov. It's based on Asius. Samach, I guess, is Sukkah, and Tezvov would be letter Tezvov, where he talks about this and mentions this. There he says Sukkah hu eir hamakiv bebina, and he brings from Zoyer and Tikkun Zoyer the Yoyer Nesiv, which is a commentary on the Me'er Eir. Moshe Papirash, I should say. I said Papirash. Yeah. Is in Yoyer Nesiv Tzeichens with the Zoyer and Tikkun Zoyer. Okay. He also says in 66 that says that the Sukkah is like Tevas Neach. The Sukkah is compared to the Ark of Neach, which is Bina. Remember, Bina is Harchova, is expansive. Chachma is a Nekudah. So if Chachma is the Mayan, the spring of water, just drops, Bina would be the river, the Chevas Hanar, that expands. But then there's a makif and primi in every level, as we discussed earlier. There's makif of Chachma, there's makif of Bina. There's the eagle of Chachma, there's the Yeshud of Chachma, in the language of Chassidus. The makif of Chachma would be what hovers above Chachma, the makif of Bina. The makifim, of course, are, like, let's say there's a makif HaKorav like clothing, or makif HaRachel like a building, like a structure, a home. They are commensurate, especially the makif HaKorav is commensurate to what it is. So Bina is Bar Chava, the makif is Bar Chava. So when you say, for example, sitting in the Ark of Neach, Tevas Neach, was Bina, but it was a Bina that surrounded them. So your question is, why is it Bina? If it's surrounding, Bina is understanding something and comprehending it in a primistic way, because even comprehension begins first in a makif. First it begins a general comprehension that still hovers above you, like surrounds you like a sukkah does, and like a teva does, a neach, or even a river for that matter. You're in a river, you're surrounded by the river. But then there's the internalization of Bina, which is the expansiveness and the comprehension of Bina that becomes internalized. So everything always has a makif and primi. When you're sitting in a sukkah, it's a makivdik experience. You're not taking it internal. You're sitting and allowing the sukkah to encompass you, to surround you. The walls surround you, that's the halacha, and the sukkah, schach, is a covering. It has to surround. So as such, it's the makifim of Bina, not Bina itself. Now, it doesn't say it specifically, but it appears that's makifim the Bina that cause a lot more awe than Bina itself. Bina, you can say you become friendly with something, you understand an idea, you're comfortable with it. So why not be there? You could sleep there too. You could sleep in Bina. But makifim the Bina has an element of awe. So how could you sleep in makifim the Bina? Such an energy is above you. Like the Rebbe gives the example, like Yaakov realized, I'm sleeping in the Hara Bayis. So it's beyond you. That's what makes it difficult to sleep there. And to just be, whatever sleep does, brings down a person to the lower level where your chayes is not fully in charge, even though a person is responsible during their sleep, as I mentioned before, but still you're not in your full glory. And it could be an element that you're essentially like insulting the makifim of Bina, except those Baalei Madrega that could have done that. So makifim the Bina has that element of awe. As I said, this doesn't say specifically, but it seems to be implied in the whole expression of wow, could you sleep in makifim of Bina? So Bina is the element of the awe, like of these rivers, of this expansive, of Rechevus Hanar, of Bina, that the Sukkah represents. And this is all hinted to in the Sukkah itself and the Schach, that are all on that level of makif. Right, the makifim the Bina. And those, as I said before, that don't feel it have the tsar for the fact that they don't feel such an element here. Also add that it says in Chassidus that Tevis Neach, where the animals all lived in peace, was a taste of what would be L'asad Lavi. And so with the Sukkah, that's a taste of the Shalom, the peace that will be, that the Sukkah also resembles the Sukkah's Eresh of Yosin, which will be the Sukkah made out of the skin, the hide of Lavyosin, the fish, the whale, the large fish, that represents the makifim that will be revealed then. And makif has that ability to equalize and unite. And that's also part of its awesome power. And a Bina also has that element of makif. Okay. Let us now go to, we'll just make one more point about the Chassidus Applied of that. And the Chassidus Applied is simple as this. When you go into a sukkah, what you're going into is, you're going into the embrace of Bina. Not the embrace of Chachma, it's not an Nekuda, it's an embrace of a structure, a bias. A bias is always connected to Bina. Bias, like the Hey, Yud K, Vav K, so Yud is the Nekuda Chachma. Hey looks like a structure, with even a space in there, even a doorway at the top. And the base bay, the bias of Bina. But there's the surrounding element, which surrounds us, and then there's the Pnimis of Bina, which we're mamshich when we L'kachtem Lachem with the Daled Minim, and which is also Das. Das is Pnimi as well. Das is only Pnimi. And so basically going from the makif of Bina to going to the Das of Pnimi. The Pnimis of Bina and then the Pnimis of Das. And that applies, as I discussed earlier, how we can discuss that in practical terms as well, how everything begins in that all-encompassing way and then it becomes something that is internalized. Yeah. So let us now deal with the 3 essays. Every week we do 3 essays from this year's essay contest. Essay number 1, The Power of Thought by Mushkie, Blesofsky, age 21, based Rivka, Division of Higher Learning, Director of Gan Chabad, North Brooklyn, an aftercare teacher. So, she writes The Power of Thought. In every situation in which we find ourselves, we have 2 options. We can choose to think the best or worst about our reality. Other than changing our mood, how much of an influence do our thoughts really have? Through exploring the Chassidic perspective, how we should channel our thoughts, we will truly grasp the full impact of our thought processes. And goes through the whole thought process and explains it according to Chassidus, Chachma Bina Das, the idea of Tragud V'Zayngut, from the Rebbe Sichos on the topic in Chelik Chav Lamed Vav in Lukut Sichos, and of course a number of different statements of betochen, what betochen is, and how that can actually, our mind change, the way we change our mind setting, our mindset can, and actually our human thoughts and perceptions determine the course of our lives. The way we think sets us on the path that life will take us. Very nicely done, nicely summarized, and concludes with 4 steps of how this mindfulness can be applied. The first is to look around the world and acknowledge the forces behind everything. The second is to personalize it, viewing this even within our own lives, which is a much more difficult step. Third, a person must visualize a positive outcome for the situation which they are dealing. Very good. Visualizing a positive outcome, even if it's not there yet. And finally, the fourth step, the person must be able to confidently believe that God will continue dealing with him in a merciful way, in the best possible way for them. And brings also from an anesthesiologist, Henry K. Beecher, this idea scientifically. We saw the placebo effect, how it affects people when they think positively, even if it's not necessarily objectively the case. Okay, next two essays are both in Hebrew. One is, we have very many Hebrew essays, excellent essays. One is A Three-Pronged Path to Meaning by Tzachi Yitzchak Parnassis. If I pronounced it wrong, I apologize. Age 40, Beis Chabad Yam HaMelech, Shliach and a presenter in Arad, Israel. So his talks about the three-pronged path to meaning. He talks about the Chassidus is all about revealing the concealed. And a lot of allusions in the words and play of words in Chassidus and other words. He says, in this essay, I will present 3 steps in how a person can reveal his most innermost desires, the innermost will that he has, and concretize it. He talks about the 3 steps. The 3 steps is Amunah, Rosh Tevis Emes, Amunah, the faith, the deep faith in this concealed state, Machshava, active thought in revealing it, and Nefesh, which is that you actually implement it and harness it in direct action. Nice essay, and again, these essays can be seen at meaningfullife.com/MyLife, or received if you subscribe to our weekly newsletter. Okay, that's essay number 2. And finally, essay number 3 is When Going All In is the Only Way by Rafal Bechar, age 50, Beersheba, Israel, works as a Misad HaChinuch, which is the educational office, as an educator. His essay is, I said, When Going All In is the Only Way. Very interesting take on the idea that we don't have a mediocre approach. The idea is that we're not just hired guns for God. We are here completely, utterly, and absolutely dedicated soldiers in his army. Sidus Nefesh, and explains the idea of this type of attitude, that when you feel you're going in all the way, it changes so much. Because it's not like you have options. It's not like you leave open, I'll do something on my own. I was created to serve God, and the Rebbe brings the second nusach. I wasn't created but to serve God. Ella means it's liikuva. It's meaning that there's nothing outside of it. It's even stronger than saying I am completely for it. You're saying I am nothing but for that. And explains in a very nice way this type of utter dedication, which captures an essential component, obviously, in Chassidus and Iskashus in our work, and can be preventive to many issues, because you don't leave room for arbitrariness in this absolute mission why we were sent to this world. With this, we shall conclude this episode, special B'Shem Hashem, leading into Sukkah's episode of MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 182. Everyone have a good Gebenchte Yar, a Gemar Tev, a Gemar Chsima Teva. The Rebbe would say Chsima, Gemar Chsima Teva, Yom Kippur is Chsima Teva, and then Heishayin Rab is the Gemar, and Shmini Atzeres is even a deeper Gemar, and Shabbos Bereshis is still the letters go out to the world of the Chsima Teva, the letters that were signed on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, signed and sealed on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. And everyone have a freilich, Zman Simcha Seinu, a real freilich, a yar that we see Simcha Begili and Simchas Elam Al Reishim, above all the Gulas, Amit Simcha, the joy, and the Gula Amitis V'Hashlema. So until next Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. every Sunday when it's not Yom Tov or Shabbat, well, not Yom Tov, I should say. So next Sunday there will be a continued the episode 183, a guten Yom Tov and a freilich and Tamid.